Number 1. A fight breaks out right in the middle of the race. February 18th, 1979, the Daytona 500. This was the first 500-mile race CBS ever broadcast live, flag to flag, and that night's audience was especially massive because a snowstorm on the East Coast had trapped millions of people at home. 16 million people watched the race, a ratings record that would stand until 2002. On the final lap, Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison were battling for the win, both driving Oldsmobiles, with Donnie's older brother, Bobby Allison, right ahead of them, about to be lapped. Yarborough tried to pass on the inside. Donnie held his line, the cars made contact, and both went sliding into the wall together. That opened the door for Richard Petty, who crossed the line first and picked up his 6th Daytona 500 win. Bobby pulled over to check on his brother. Yarborough came at him almost immediately, shouting that the wreck was Bobby's fault, then hit him in the face with his helmet. Bobby climbed out of his car, and the fight was on. Yarborough throwing punches, Bobby choking him back, Donnie swinging his own helmet around and threatening to jump in. All of it aired live, coast to coast. NASCAR fined all 3 drivers $6,000 and put the Allison brothers on probation on top of that. A few days later, an unknown caller phoned Donnie's wife and said, "They have a film that shows the wreck. Make them show it to you." Then hung up. At the appeal hearing, Donnie was finally shown a 3rd, previously unreleased film. It confirmed that Yarborough made the first contact. The probation was transferred to him instead. Whoever called Donnie's wife that day was never identified. Number 2. The race whose winner couldn't be determined for 3 days. February 22nd, 1959 saw the very first Daytona 500, the debut of the brand new 2.5-mile track. In the closing laps, Lee Petty in an Oldsmobile and Johnny Beauchamp in a Ford Thunderbird were racing so close together that they crossed the finish line almost simultaneously, alongside Joe Weatherly's car, which was a lap down. There was no electronic timing back then, and no finish line camera either. The official at the line eyeballed it and gave the win to Beauchamp, but Petty protested immediately. Driver Fireball Roberts, who was standing near the finish line, also insisted Petty had won, not Beauchamp. NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. officially declared the result unofficial, and waited 3 days for photographs and newsreel footage from several trackside cameras to be developed. On Wednesday, the photos finally confirmed it. Petty had beaten Beauchamp by a few feet. His average speed for the race was 135.5 miles per hour, and the winner's check came to $20,000. The whole delay kept NASCAR on the front page of the sports section for a full week, and only made the new race more popular. Number 3. The winner limped across the finish line at 20 miles an hour. February 15th, 1976, the same Daytona track, the final lap. Richard Petty was leading. David Pearson tucked in behind him, waiting for his moment. Coming into turn 3, Pearson executed the slingshot pass, breaking out of Petty's draft to take the lead. Petty tried to return the favor exiting turn 4, the cars made contact, and both slid into the wall. Pearson hit nose first and spun, ending up on the grass near pit road. Petty also hit the wall, then spun down the front stretch, and with about 50 yards left to the finish line, his engine died. Pearson managed to do what Petty couldn't. He pushed in the clutch and kept his engine from stalling. His battered Mercury crawled across the finish line at roughly 20 miles an hour, giving Pearson the only Daytona 500 win of his entire career. Petty's crew ran out onto the track to push his car, even though that's strictly against the rules, and still didn't make it in time. The race ended the instant Pearson crossed the line. Petty's son, Kyle, wanted to run over and fight the Wood Brothers crew in Victory Lane. Richard stopped him, saying the race was over and they'd settle things the following week at Rockingham. A week later, Petty really did win at Rockingham, while Pearson blew an oil pump. Number 4, the biggest cheating scandal in Daytona 500 history. A week before that Petty-Pearson finish at qualifying for that same Daytona 500, something even stranger happened. NASCAR had just capped engine displacement at 358 cubic inches for every manufacturer, so everyone expected slower lap times. Instead, A.J. Foyt ran his Chevrolet up to 187.5 miles per hour, and Darrell Waltrip hit 186.5, almost a full second faster than anyone had run in practice, with a suspiciously wide gap back to 4th place. NASCAR's technical director, Bill Gazaway, pulled the cars, Foyt's, Waltrip's, and a third car driven by Dave Marcis, in for a re-inspection that took 7 hours. Foyt's and Waltrip's cars turned out to have nitrous oxide systems, capable of adding up to 50 extra horsepower for a short burst. Waltrip's crew had hidden their setup so cleverly inside a hollowed-out chassis brace that inspectors were literally holding onto the very part while searching everywhere else for the bottle, until NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. threatened to cut every bar on the car open with a hacksaw. Only then did the crew admit where it was hidden, worried the pressurized bottle might explode mid-cut. Foyt's car owner, Hoss Ellington, claimed he'd simply forgotten the bottle was even in there, left over from another race 3 years earlier. Marcis's car was disqualified for a different reason, an illegal movable deflector in front of the radiator. Every team involved, including a fourth car belonging to Bruce Hill, where a bottle was also found, simply had their qualifying times thrown out. NASCAR officially avoided the words cheating or disqualified, and all of them were allowed to re-qualify later that week. Number 5. The unknown voice that stopped a champion cold, right on the track. August 12th, 1973, the Talladega 500. On lap 14, driver Larry Smith crashed into the turn 1 wall after a tire failure and died of a basilar skull fracture. The track physician later revealed that Smith had cut away part of his helmet's inner lining to make room for his long hair. Despite the tragedy, the race went on. Much later in the race, running at full speed, 1970 champion Bobby Isaac suddenly radioed his car owner, Bud Moore, saying he needed someone to replace him. He pulled into the pits, climbed out of the car, and walked away from the track. Once he reached a phone, he called his wife and told her a voice inside the cockpit had ordered him to get out immediately, or something bad would happen. Patsy later said she wasn't sure whether it had been intuition or an actual voice, but the effect on her husband was real enough. He refused to get back in the car for the rest of the race. Isaac himself insisted for the rest of his life that it had nothing to do with Smith's death earlier that same day. The story became permanently attached to Talladega's reputation as a cursed track, supposedly built over an old Native American burial ground, although journalists later debunked most of that legend. Number 6. A trauma that changed the driver forever. Lonnie Leroy Yarbrough shouldn't be confused with Cale Yarborough from the first story. The names look almost identical, but they're different people. In 1969, Yarborough was arguably the best driver in NASCAR that season. He won 7 races, including the Daytona 500, the World 600 at Charlotte, where he lapped the entire field twice, and the Southern 500 at Darlington, becoming only the 3rd driver in history to sweep all 3 of the series' most prestigious races in a single season. But all of that success came apart on April 22nd, 1970. During Goodyear tire testing at Texas World Speedway, a tire blew out on Yarborough's car between turns 3 and 4, sending it into the wall at over 160 miles per hour. His head hit the roll bar with enough force to crack his helmet. He was released from the hospital that same evening. The injury wasn't considered serious at the time, but Yarborough would never remember the crash itself, the hospital stay, or even his friend Cale Yarborough picking him up from the airport afterward. A year later, practicing for the Indianapolis 500, Yarborough crashed again and suffered another head injury. The head injuries kept piling up over the years. Compounded by alcohol, he was drinking more and more heavily. By 1973, he had effectively vanished from NASCAR. In February 1980, while washing dishes at his mother's kitchen sink, Leroy suddenly said he was about to do something he didn't want to do, and began strangling her with his bare hands. His nephew managed to stop him, knocking him out with a jar of jelly. Police didn't arrive for several minutes, and it took multiple firefighters to restrain him. The court ruled that his brain damage had left him unable to distinguish right from wrong, and sent him for mandatory treatment instead of prison. Yarborough had no memory of the attack himself, and for almost a month didn't even know why he was being held. His former team owner, Junior Johnson, arranged for his transfer to a clinic in North Carolina and helped raise money for his treatment, but doctors eventually concluded the brain damage was permanent. On December 7, 1984, after a severe seizure, Yarborough fell, struck his head, and died of a brain hemorrhage. He was only 46 years old. This is just a small part of what NASCAR was like, back when it looked more like a western than a modern sport. If you know of other insane moments worth making a video about, drop them in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next one.